Hi there, I'm sitting here with Nigel Farage, who of course you know, but you know him mainly for politics. Did you know that he has actually quite an interesting financial background? And I'm going to talk to him about that. Nigel, hello.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, you're absolutely right. I was one of those people who, I skipped university because the city, Mrs. Thatcher had been elected, exchange controls had been removed, and there was this new phenomenon called the yuppie.
Yes.
Young, upwardly mobile, and they were driving Porsches.
Yes.
And I was 18, and I thought, I want to be one of those. So I went straight into the city at 18, straight from school. I worked on the London Metal Exchange, open outcry, very exciting place for a young person to work. It was a terrific place to work. I then, after that, worked for some very big American houses, Chicago-based houses. And kind of there we were doing not just metals, but trading in soft commodities, currencies, all sorts of financial products. And I did that for 20 years. And politics was a growing interest. And in a sense, my anti-EU beliefs came in through the job, because I saw the city was starting to become regulated from Brussels. Well, how does that make sense when it's a global marketplace that London excels at? So politics really came out of business. So I really packed up in 2002. The last few years I had my own brokerage firm that I ran. And then I kind of, through all the years in the city, particularly the years of running my own company, I'd put money away every year. I thought, you've got to save for the future. You've got to be sensible.
Yep.
So don't actually have the big family holiday in Barbados. Don't actually get the latest model car. Put the money aside. And I put money aside really all through the 90s, and reasonably, for where I was in my life, quite a lot of money aside, and just thought, right, I'm now going to focus full-time on politics. That's what I did. And whilst I kept an eye on what was happening in the financial world, once you've lived in it and breathed it, you can't drop it. And then I kind of get to the end of, Brexit happens in 16, and I think, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Because I wasn't in politics for rank or position. I was in it for this great goal of turning the country around in terms of its direction. And it was the first time then I sort of looked at a statement and thought,
how much?
What's going on?
Yeah.
And then I started to sort of have a look through, and I'm talking about quite reputable companies, the sheer amount of money, compounded fees over that 20-year period. And I thought, okay, I have been busy, I have been working 7 days a week, but I've been a mug, basically. So that kind of reawakened my thoughts about, on personal level, investing, what to do. And that's why last year I decided, I've taken on the political establishment. Maybe it's time to take on the financial establishment. Now, caveat that by saying there are some very, very good people out there, and there are plenty of good financial advisors. There's no question about that. But the industry is not there for your benefit. The industry is there for its benefit. And as I say, the compounded fee structure that exists within this says to me that the individual actually can do better for themselves by taking back control
yes.
over their own lives, their own destiny. And sure, they'll make mistakes and get things wrong, but then professional managers make mistakes and get things wrong. So that's what really got me back into it, and I got involved with a firm called South Bank, who do very much as you do, financial market newsletters. They're quite a large organisation, and so we do a daily email that goes out, and I work together with a team of people, some really experienced people, and funnily enough, people who work for firms like Goldman, who I can't stand, because they got Greece into the euro. Unforgivable. But so we got some people working here who have been in the financial money management industry. They know what the flaws of it are. So what we're trying to do with this daily email, number one, as you do, keep people up to date with current affairs and everything else. But number two, to try and unpeel the mystique around all this.
And help people do things for themselves.
Yeah, because kind of what the industry says is, look, we're the clever people, you're the peasantry. Just give it to us, let us get on with it, rather like politics. Just don't worry your little heads about this. And so that's what we've been trying to do, to unpeel some of it to, for example, if people want to buy gold, okay, our job isn't necessarily to tell them whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. Our job is to say to them, okay, you want to buy gold, this is where you ought to go to get it, where you're not going to get ripped off with some crackpot premium. If you want to store it, these people would charge very reasonable rent and insurance. That's one example. We started off at the end of last year talking very much about cryptocurrencies. And of course, the Bank of England and the establishment will tell you, you'll lose all your money and it'll all be a disaster. But again, we talked about crypto, getting on for a year ago. And we talked about, if you want to buy crypto, this is what you should avoid doing.
Same as me.
Yeah, this is where the pitfalls are.
Yep.
So yes, I've been involved in this now with them for just over a year. And yeah, it takes a bit of my time, but I find it very interesting and very exciting.
Yeah, and the reason we're speaking now is because I get this newsletter. I find it useful. I think it's very helpful. So if people sign up for it, what are they going to get? Because it's free, isn't it?
Yeah, it's fortuneandfreedom.com, and it's there, and it's and you can take as much of it or as little of it as you want to. But every day something comes out to you, and it's fairly topical. It's very topical.
Yeah.
It does talk about big events that happen in the markets, but obviously, geopolitics affects markets in the most dramatic way. So we don't just do a written newsletter. Once a week, I do, a head-to-head, my take on the week's events, what I think's happening in America, what I think might be happening, in Europe, in the UK. So we do that. I do some question times, sort of face to camera where people
ask you questions,
sending questions and all the rest of it. So yeah, there is a degree of interactivity as well with it.
And speaking of geopolitics, etc., we're in an extraordinary time at the moment, economically, financially, politically, socially. What do you feel are the elements that ordinary people at home are going to have to grapple with when it comes to their money in the next, say, 12, 24 months?
Yeah, firstly, there are the social issues, which aren't going to go away. And that is, what is my kid being taught at school? And frankly, the emails I get every week on this are horrifying. So there is a big social dimension to politics, and it's going to be very interesting. The French elections later this year, I think, are going to be fought on social issues.
Interesting.
Going to be fought around the integrity of French society, identity, all of those things. A bit like Brexit, really. But that debate's coming to France in a very, very big way. The economics are fascinating. You see, there was Boris Johnson, Tory party conference, and it was classic Boris Johnson. One or two good jokes, I thought, talking about Michael Gove in nightclubs, John Bon Jovi. That was good. I like that. That was good. And everything's great, it's going to be wonderful, and the audience loved it, and the Tories have been drinking champagne and partying very hard up in Manchester, whilst actually out there the reality for millions is very, very different. The economic illiteracy of Johnson's speech showed you how much trouble we're headed for. He didn't even once in the whole speech use the word inflation.
Yeah.
Not once. And then he talked about the cost of living and said we're going to bring down the cost of living. Well, number one, that's actually beyond government's control. And number two, all the measures he's putting in place, especially with this drive towards saying there'll be no fossil fuels used in electricity production by 2035. Number one, it isn't going to happen. But number two, he's going to try. And that is going to put the most astonishing bills on households at a time, and I can see it, you can see it. You and I spoke a few months ago about this.
We did, yeah.
That actually what we've got going on here is we've got a commodity boom. I should be a broker again, shouldn't I, really? But we've got a commodity boom going on. We've got rising domestic bills. We've got shortages.
Yes. Yeah.
Living in Kent, the fuel crisis has been just astonishingly bad. All these things going on. Wage inflation. Amazing, isn't it? Conservative Prime Minister praising wage inflation, the very thing that brought them down in the mid-70s as a government and caused Thatcher so much pain in the early 80s. So it's all well and good saying, marvellous, wages are rising, everything's brilliant. But if the cost of living rises more than your wages rise, you're not actually better off.
No, exactly. Yeah.
And I mean, the CEBR this week put some figures out suggesting that the average family of 4 would be worse off by nearly 2,000 quid a year just because of inflation and household bills. And that's before the tax increases kick in next year. So I think that inflation is here and here to stay. Inflation is a disease of money caused by governments, but governments would never admit that.
Yes.
But it is government policy across the West that is. Now, it's given us this sort of false period during the pandemic. Everything's looked okay economically because of massive amounts of money being pumped in.
Correct, yeah.
So we have inflation, we have wage inflation. You will see this winter the trade unions flexing their muscles in a way they haven't flexed them for a very, very long time. And all of this happening at a time when our productivity, whatever the Prime Minister says, our productivity is not great, and I can promise you work from home is not the answer to productivity problems. I'm very sceptical about that. But growth, we need growth. For any of this to be sustainable, we need growth. And the signs are that growth is not looking particularly good. So we're actually looking at what we are now entering into. How long it lasts is open as a matter of debate. But we're entering into a period of stagflation. Yeah. Now, stagflation, I can hear people now say, what the hell was that? Because we haven't had it for 40 years, but it is. No. It is. Growth is stagnant, but inflation is still rising. All of which leads to a very big debate around what happens to interest rates. And clearly interest rates are going up. If you look across the Western world over the last fortnight, there have been over 100 rate increases.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
All over the world, rates are going up, and at the moment, not by very much. Rates will go up. Now, when Thatcher wanted to put a lid on inflation, which she did very successfully, albeit at a huge cost.
Yeah, exactly. Putting them right up.
Well, the medicine was very unpleasant. But she put rates up, interest rates up to 12%.
Yes.
That was the classic way of dampening down inflation, is putting up rates. The Bank of England will put rates up, but they can't afford to put rates up that much. No. Otherwise, the whole thing collapses.
We don't have growth. And it's, as you say, and this is the big problem about stagflation. And interestingly, I did interview Nick Hubble, who is the editor of Fortune and Freedom, all about the different exciting types of inflation that we could have. And it seemed to me then, it seems to me now, as you're saying, that stagflation is the most likely.
Yeah, and here's the problem. The type of people that are going to watch this podcast are, by their very nature, sensible people, not necessarily frugal, but they are
wanting to be sensible.
They're putting money aside for a rainy day. They're putting money aside for retirement because you never know what's around the corner. Exactly. And hey, hasn't the pandemic proved?
Yes, quite.
The need to do that. And here's the problem. At the start of the 1970s, there were people like my grandparents who had been sensible, lived through 2 world wars, knew that bad stuff could happen, and had saved money. But of course they kept it in the post office.
Yes.
Or they kept it on current account. Because actually, interest was being earned on that money, and it didn't seem that bad a place to have your money. It was safe and all the rest of it. But if your money was invested in building societies and banks at the start of the 1970s, you could be comparatively well off. By 1977, you were comparatively badly off because your money had devalued 60, 70% over that period of time. Now, I'm not suggesting we're going to get inflation of 26% again, but I am suggesting that real inflation now is probably 6 to 7%. And funny, isn't it, the way inflation's measured now?
Yes.
So,
like unemployment, yes, it's all messed around.
I mean, in America, American inflation is 5%, right? But if you take the same basket that was being used in 1980 in America, it's 12.5%. So governments and central banks play games with this. So here's the point, that even the most sensible, most cautious investor needs to have a few alarm bells ringing in their mind about the threats to their investments that are there.
So what do you think right now, somebody who's watching this right now, what do you think they should be thinking about when it comes to where on earth to put their money? Because it's not savings accounts, is it? Not at the moment.
Well, that's the big point I'm making.
Yeah.
Is that the classic safe investment.
Bonds, hopeless.
Bonds, disastrous.
Absolutely.
And here's another thing, really interesting. why do so many people who manage our pension funds and manage our money put lumps of money in bonds?
Exactly. That's what I keep asking.
The regulators.
Oh, okay.
The regulators. The regulators think that provided an asset manager has still got a big lump in bonds, they're being responsible with their customers' money, even if it's returning negatives.
Yes, it makes no sense.
So it makes no sense, but it's a hangover, and it's the way, I'm afraid, in which we're regulated. That's a big, big element of all of this. So yes, cash, hopeless, going ahead. Bonds, worse than hopeless, I would suggest. Equities, well, it depends on what you're looking at. I mean, frankly, NASDAQ, a lot of the tech stuff, I mean, it's trading at PE ratios that history tells you these aren't going to stay there. So I do think overall, I mean, what we learned from the stock market crash in the 70s, and it was a big stock market crash. What we learned from that, and of course we had, you know, the secondary banking crisis and all those things that happened back then. What we did learn through that period was that good, solid companies making trusted products who don't have heavy debt balance sheets and who pay regular dividends to their customers, actually, even if you do get a dramatic fall in the stock market, those stocks fall, but not for terribly long, because that's kind of where the money tends to go. So I think those, but I also think there's a lot outside of this. And as I say, you know, the job with our newsletter is not to tell you what to do with your money, but it's to open up to you the possibilities of what you might be able to do. And I think anyone that just brushes aside the whole crypto world because they've listened to the Bank of England or whatever. Very interesting, isn't it? I mean, you know, the boss of the Fed in America has said they have no intention of trying to ban cryptocurrencies. And if you look in America, just over the last year, at the number of more people commercially who are prepared to take crypto. I met the...
El Salvador.
Well, El Salvador probably didn't have much option.
No.
It may not be the best example. No. But I was in Miami back in April. Met the mayor of Miami, Suarez, very go-ahead.
Very interesting guy.
Very bright guy. And he wants Miami to become the first crypto city.
Right.
In that, you know, you can pay for your coffee.
With crypto,
or with dollars, or with whatever you want to do. So crypto is more generally, more widely accepted than it was this time last year. The Americans are waking up to the reality of it. And as with almost everything that happens, whether it's film, music, or business trends, we will do what the Americans do.
We do. What about gold? Because that's another one.
Gold has become unfashionable again, and it's sort of, in relative terms, languished. I think because some of the money that's hedging against a big stock market fall has gone to crypto. That might in the past have gone to gold. But again, you know, you have to try and learn the lessons from history. And if things do get rough, gold tends to be a place where people feel comfortable.
Exactly, and as you mentioned earlier, commodities generally, that seems to be an interesting one as well.
Yes, it really is. It's much more difficult though. You know, to trade commodities for the private individual. I mean, there are ways of doing it.
Funds.
There are ways of doing it. There are funds. There are, you know, mining stocks.
ETFs. And all of
there are ETFs. There are even spread betting.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I mean, these are reputable firms. They're public companies. So there are ways of doing it, but it's not quite as easy.
So if somebody likes the sound of this and they think, okay, I'd like to sign up to this free newsletter, and that's a big plus as far as I'm concerned, what do they do? Where do they go?
It's fortuneandfreedom.com. It's dead simple. It's there. As I say, there's a daily newsletter. There's a weekly review from me, which is more the geopolitics of what's going on in the world. There are Q&As, etc. And you know, hopefully we can help to sort of unpeel some of the mystery that surrounds personal investing, and I think that this is one of the most. I think the financial services industry is one of the most complacent industries that you've ever seen. It operates for its benefit, not for yours, take back control.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nigel. Thanks for coming along.
It's a pleasure.
Really interesting.